Welcome to the News Roundup podcast with Hector Combo. I bring you a confirmation of a story I've worked in 2 months before, where I mentioned the Federal Reserve projection of 40 million of Americans unemployed. And now the recession is confirmed by mainstream media outlets such as the Associated Press. They feature economists talking about how unemployment and the expanded economic consequences of the coronavirus will are literally putting us in a recession. And if you follow along with the propaganda in the mainstream media, sometimes you'll find the truth, but you have to dig deep and use your reason, your discernment, and backtrack the story beyond what they're telling you. And I'm going to read two paragraphs from here and a quote, but there is a bigger story. So I'll put this forward for you to research on your own. The U.S. economy entered a recession in February as the coronavirus struck the nation. A group of economists declared Monday. The economists said that employment, income, and spending peaked in February and then fell sharply afterward as the viral outbreak shut down. And, remember in the sources that I talked in my previous News Roundup podcast and in my articles, I talked about how millions of Americans are unable to pay their car loans and are living paycheck to paycheck, have very little savings, and that affects people in the aggregate. And the coronavirus was just an accelerator. It exacerbated the situation. The Federal Reserve manipulating the currency and the economy in an attempt to create a state of prosperity in artificial terms has caused so many problems. And this is not just one president or the previous one. It's been systematically done. And people politically chose to adopt these solutions because they wanted to have an unearned privilege, and it's not a racial one. We'll talk about the article where it mentions exorbitant privileges of the economic kind, and it affects everyone in the major picture. But here's the quote that kind of strikes with me. We could have the shortest recession in history. It seems ridiculous, but we could. So says the economist who has been quoted by the Associated Press. This bottom is going to be uniquely deep, and we don't know how fast we will get out of the bottom. And remember, I said economy, exorbitant privilege, currency, politics, and we're just starting with the Associated Press, which has confirmed my reports of a U.S. recession. And, depending on who you ask and depending on what your economic or philosophical political persuasion is, this could be a good thing or bad thing. This was created by government or it was exacerbated by government. But ultimately, we can all agree that there is an economic downturn, that things are getting more expensive and pricier. And it's not only with the coronavirus outbreak that caused this, but it's such a longer, bigger story. But I like to bring you to the main picture here. The big picture is we have to decrypt it. There's a big puzzle here. Now, this is a story from Yahoo Finance. Sign stock rally is doomed to end after 21 trillion rebound. And if you follow the story of the stocks, it seems like personally it doesn't directly affect you because these companies that are evaluated in the stock exchange, well, there are so many ways to rig a chart and project earnings. And there is an incentive by chief executive officers who are leading these corporations that, on the outward chart, they might look like they're prosperous, but in reality, the CEO has a vested interest to make it seem like the bottom line of everyone is growing. So in other words, in my opinion, the stock market is not a good indicator or reflection of what the economy is about, but it does tell you what the big money is doing. And here's a story, a couple of paragraphs from this long article. I recommend that you read it and not only take it for granted, but ask the question of many, many, many different perspectives are coming to a point where coronavirus is the main death knell of America. But remember, there's a bigger story here. So let me go ahead and read you this article. As a sense of euphoria sweeps through the global equity markets, propelling stocks to regain $21 trillion in value from a March low, the asset class is looking increasingly frothy. While stock luminaries who had advocated for a recovery look like winners, in hindsight, the debate goes on about whether the rally is a bad bear market bounce doomed to an end. Asia ended the day up off the session's high, while equities in Europe slipped in early trade, with the stocks Europe 600 falling as much as 1.6%. It's a similar picture for the US market, as S&P 500 futures were doomed 0.9%. And if you are new to financial news, you don't know what this means. These S&P 500, the stocks Europe 600, there are indexes. They're an amalgamation of different industries and companies, and it reads the general trend, whether it's going up or down. If in a bear market, things are pessimistic. In a bull market, everyone's optimistic and making money. So here in this article, it's talking about all these different elements coming together, but the pattern that is unfolding with the coronavirus, the political uncertainty, the growing government deficits. By growing government deficits, is we are in a lot of debt as a country, and we don't have a lot of savings. And the representation of our economy, the S&P 500, the Wall Street stock market, all that, they are rigged economic models, and the data is not necessarily very reliable, but it can function as an indicator of where, vaguely speaking, the economy or the patterns of the economy are going. There's this quote that I'm going to read for you. If everyone is holding stocks just to pass on to the next greater fool, remember, no one knows what is going to happen. People are pessimistic. Some of them are optimistic. And there are banking interests that are trying to pump the economy by creating money and credit. But instead of giving it to the people, they're giving it to the major corporations and the major banking interests that are supposedly keeping everyone, from going bankrupt. But here's a quote that is kind of underlines what I'm saying. There is no underlying value in these assets or in these stocks. They are just rigged by some momentum and some political monetary policy. But he exemplifies what I'm saying is exemplified in this quote. If everyone is holding stocks just to pass on to the next greater fool, there's no value. The value comes from selling it to somebody else who's stupid. And if the greatest fool is the central bank, and if that greatest fool is the central bank, who's going to buy anything, no matter how bad it is, because that's what they think is going to recover the economy, by bailing out, quantitative easing, by printing out money and just buying up whatever junk bond or negative asset that there is, because they're the lender of last resort, I suppose. That's what they say. And if the greatest fool is a central bank with infinite liquidity, with infinite money, with infinite credit to buy them, then yes, prices will keep going up. So, intuitively, if you go to the supermarket, you'll notice that things are slowly getting more expensive, but that doesn't reflect the growing government help. So supposedly the government, with the CARE Act and all the bailouts to the people of $1,200, and maybe a potential more money coming our way, as if, it's just gonna not have any negative impact, has created a tension where there is no savings, and the government continues to borrow to create these bailout programs, which explicitly benefit big corporations and big banks. That's the problem there. And at the very end, we get the crumbs, or we get the very small amount. But this tension of low savings, growing deficits, and government bailout programs that have unintended consequences, then it creates this massive tension. And the tension is a crash in the dollar as a reserve currency. And if you don't know the story, because of World War II and because of the implied or the inherent idea in the narrative of American exceptionalism, a lot of the countries around the world accepted our currency, our dollars, because they thought we were strong, moral people who were producing wealth, and that we had a moral compass. And if we did get involved in wars abroad, that there was a reason for it, that there was, a democracy, peace, liberal markets, things like that. And those things now, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, I'm 30 years old, but I've been researching and reading the news ever since I was a kid, and I've lived in Mexico. So I can, even though I'm not a genius, I can see the patterns, and the political pattern is that there's a growing economic inequity that is purposeful. That's my opinion, and I'm just letting you know it's my opinion. It's not my necessarily fact. If you want to research it and look at up on your own, please do the research. In this News Roundup podcast, we take mainstream media articles and we look beyond the lines. So, okay, so that story of how American exceptionalism and the dominating currency of the American dollar across the world has created more inequity, has created more monopolies, and has created third world countries more and more. You know, third world meaning that they are not advanced in science, intelligence, and knowledge, but because of so many, you know, let's just get with the article because I could just keep going and going. But the whole problem is the currency. That's the whole conclusion here, that the currency being manipulated by a nefarious self-interest that doesn't actually produce wealth for everyone is creating more inequity. All right, so here's the article. It says the era of the US dollar's exorbitant privilege. Remember I said earlier exorbitant privilege. And this is not a white thing. This is something of an economic nature. All right. As the world's primary reserve currency is coming to an end, the French finance minister Valéry Giscard d'Estaing coined the phrase in the 1960s, largely out of frustration, bemoaning a U.S. that drew freely on the rest of the world to support its overextended standard of living for almost 60 years. The world complained but did nothing about it. These days are over. Those days are over. Okay, and those days are coming back to us. So the previous decades of the supposed boom, where the boomers, you know, and other people made it seem like it was so easy to go out, get a college education, buy property, and move and get ahead. Those times are over, and those times were only possible because of the economic manipulation of the currency at the expense of the whole world. And this has been talked about since the 60s by, you know, prominent politicians and people in the know. All right, so it goes, the article, already stressed by the impact of COVID-19 pandemic, U.S. living standards are about to be squeezed as never before. At the same time, the world is having serious doubts about the once widely accepted presumption of American exceptionalism. Currency set the equilibrium between these two forces, domestic economic fundamentals and foreign perception of a nation's strength or weakness. The balance is shifting, and a crash in the dollar could be well in the offing. I don't necessarily agree with everything in this article, but there are some good points. And, you know, this particular paragraph right here tells you a lot, because the balance between the forces of, you know, between the forces of domestic productivity, savings, and, you know, people coexisting and collaborating in mutual aid, that in itself, if we had a honest and an authentic currency that represents value and doesn't actually distort it and deceive us into believing that we are increasing in prosperity, then we could also have the ability to be peaceful and prosperous. But because the policy of the United States has been changed to a financial one, the important part of our empire, because it is a hegemony, you know, around the world, there's so many military bases that prevent other people from doing what they want to do. You know, their own direct, authentic population wants to do something outside of the military industrial complex. They're not allowed to do that. And it usually happens more and more when people adopt a dollar. It's very constricting. And we have, you know, the economic retaliations in Venezuela, Syria, and all these other places that, you know, they negatively harm the people, not the state. They, you know, an already collapsing economy with currency checks, you know, with currency protections, or meaning like you're not going to be participating in our freedom club, then you're not going to be using our dollars, and everyone else is buying and using dollars and functioning with the dollar to make business. So you're excommunicated from that. And that's what has been the pattern of control, an economic one. And now the entertainment that is kept us glued to, you know, everything outside of the political machinery has now crept itself into the American heart, because we are now suffering the consequences of all those negative, unethical actions that included everyone's participation in one way or the other, because of the fact that they are operating in the currency of the dollar, which is the matrix of control. It's an economic one, but without fake currency, we wouldn't have an overextended military, because you need a fake currency. You need a fiat money in order to expand the military, expand the police, expand all these government programs that inevitably distort the perception of what is natural, spontaneous, and creative, and local, and representative of the people, with what is the state apparatus, which is based on violence, force, and fraud, and it needs that to continue to grow. That's the two main distinctions here to have. So it's important to keep these articles in mind, and I'll be sharing them in the sources below so you can do your own research. Now, one thing that really sticks with me in these critical times is opportunities, challenges. You know, it's about your perception as a person that matters more in your world than the political patterns of control, because you know the distortion of our mind is one part responsible of the media. The media is explicitly trying to divide us and conquer us, but the other part comes from within, when we are full of anger, suffering, and we don't recognize that we have the power to change our surroundings if we take action in a meaningful way. Then, you know, we become disempowered and we let life slip by, and we are drowned in our own suffering. You know, if it helps you, you know, nobody cares. And that might hurt people when they hear that, but that should give you so much freedom, because you should care. If nobody's caring, you should care about you and yourself, your friends, and your family, and do anything you can to motivate yourself to create peace and prosperity and abundance. Now, a good thing about what I am saying is that it's not an idealistic, hopeless thing, and it's just a ramblings of a guy who has fanciful ideas. It's a pattern of human engagement that is popular, and it's going to guarantee the next stage of human evolution. This is my opinion. But all right, let's follow an article on mutual aid is sweeping the world. Here's how we make this anarchist way of organizing last. This is an article from the correspondent.com, and it talks about the growing popularity in mutual aid. And it tells you different ways that mutual aid has helped long lasting, and it's not just a pipe dream. I'm going to read a couple of sections from this article, and I'm going to pass it over to you so you can read it. But it mentions an example in Argentina where there was an economic crisis and they were unable to get any help from the government. So the people in that location took it upon themselves to do something about it, and they did some meaningful things that we can learn. On a sunny Thursday afternoon in April, an estimated 500,000 senior citizens across Argentina opened their doors to receive freshly prepared meal delivered entirely free of charge. It was simple yet touching gesture that showed the recipients that their need to feed themselves despite living under compulsory isolation had not gone unnoticed, right? And what is mutual aid, or what is this all about? So mutual aid is horizontalism, as some of these activists describe it. In other words, the main problem with political action and government policies is that it's not a horizontal, it's not a balanced, it's not a leveled approach. It's a top-down approach. There's a hierarchy, but hierarchies in themselves are not bad. The problem is that there is no way for this bottom of the hierarchy to communicate and make any meaningful progress and interaction with the top, because the top is so far removed from the local perspective and what is actually happening that they abstract and create ideas that are not necessarily logical and reasonable, but instead they're political and self-interest. And that's what causes a lot of the problems to exacerbate or even further divide us, because then we think that we all have to get to the power of the government, and make all these changes so that they last. But in reality, if you really study this, it is up to us. And a lot of people don't want to hear that, because that means that they actually have to work and do something and be responsible and have honesty about themselves. And this goes to everyone, not just some particular group or anything. It's really important for us to take lessons from the past. And so these good, meaningful lessons are here to stay, but we need to practice them. Okay, let's continue on reading. This is just one example among thousands of acts of compassion, solidarity, and voluntary cooperation. Voluntary cooperation, very important. that have been making headlines around the world. The groundswell of activity, which falls under the banner of mutual aid because it comes from within communities themselves and is geared towards long-term solutions. As Barrios de Pie put it, at social justice and social transformation has in many instances outpaced state-led attempts at volunteering. Perhaps we shouldn't be surprised that humans are kind. After all, this is the case Russian author, nobleman, and anarchist Peter Kropotkin, who came up with the term, makes in his who came up with this term, mutual aid, makes in his 1902 essay in which he writes, besides the law of mutual struggle, there is in nature the law of mutual aid, which for the success of the struggle for life, and especially for the progressive evolution of the species, is far more important than the law of mutual contest. So mutual collaboration, mutual aid is the law of nature, and there is this bastardization of what is natural, of what is human by the state, and there's a propagandistic effort to conflate anarchy with destroying other people's property, business, and things like that, and hurting others. That's not what anarchy is. It's much more than that, and I don't identify myself as one thing or the other. All I can tell you is that these labels are hinting at something that is much bigger than just a political fascination with freedom. It's much larger than that. It's spiritual, it's transcendental. This is my personal opinion. So if you don't like it, it's okay. Just make sure that you do your own research and at least challenge yourself to listen to other perspectives. That way you understand. And you can also learn from people you disagree with or even hate. So remember, conversation is very important. All right. So one of these things that pops out at me as mutual aid, normal human engagement, whatever ism you like to ascribe to it, as long as it's free voluntary action and you're not forcing other people to volunteer with the use of government, then it is a noble pursuit in my opinion. All right, so here's the quote. It is horizontalism, mutual aid, this is what they think about it. It is a social relationship that implies, as its name suggests, a flat plane upon which to communicate. Horizontalism necessarily implies the use of direct democracy and the striving for consensus, processes in which attempts are made to let everyone be heard. Exactly. And so with the Laredo Free Thinkers and the localized community of Freedom Cells and the active participation of others in the community of Laredo, Texas, it is my intention to do this and bring it into action. But I've already done this in the past, and I know it happens, and I know it's easy to do. It just takes a lot of work. Easy to make it happen, work to be there to make it happen. So I know that this seems like an idealistic thing, but trust me, I've done it in the past. It's so wonderful, and it trains you to be an effective leader full of wisdom and compassion. That's an important aspect of this. And sustainability and solidarity is something that we need to keep in mind, because there are other examples here. I'm just surmising what the article is saying. There are some examples in the American crisis, such as the Katrina event, where there was some localized spontaneous action of people who were volunteers and were in it for everyone and had mutual aid. Sometimes the challenge when it comes with that is persistence, is keeping it alive, keeping the whole culture of freedom alive and keeping the activism alive, because it's not just to change people's minds, it's to create a peace and prosperity for everyone in your local community. That's a lifelong journey, and it's not something that is going to earn you a badge and give you a big office and a big building. No, it's something that is natural and concrete to human experience. And so if you're doing this, you need to check yourself before you enter this battlefield of thought, because you're going to be checked by the idea that you have to get everyone involved and you have to have a bunch of people together. No, you yourself, your friends, your family, whoever is available to listen to you and engage with you. Remember, challenge each other to become compassionate and have mutual aid and go beyond the isms and really just be human. Anyway, so the fight for and not just against. So, in the conclusion of this article is that we need to continue fighting for and not against. While we're reacting to the culture of control, tyranny, we may internalize the prison system. And by that, I mean, while things are full of tension and conflict, we see this world now more and more often as a prison planet, and our country is now seen as a police state because it is a police state and has developed for many years to be that way. But the other problem is that we sometimes are complicit in the police state as well. We internalize that tyranny and become authoritarians ourselves, and we want to control and create these political solutions because we think that it is up to us in a political dimension to change the whole world. But no, that is arrogance of the mind, and that is arrogance of the ego. Our intellectual vanity sometimes tells us that we can, change the world if we get everyone together and we have these simplistic ideas. I'm sorry, but it doesn't work that way. That's a reductionist thing, and we are not going to be children. We're going to be mature, wise adults, so our children can be wise adults as well. So here's that problem that I told you about, but it is not really a problem if you're responsible, active, and you believe in what you do. Citizens patrol organize across Minneapolis as confidence in the police force plummets. There's a very positive article, but there is an inherent problem in what is going on. So the problems in Minneapolis has caused so much conflict and tension that the residents have taken upon themselves to create resistance cells, or they call themselves freedom fighters, as an allusion to the bus riders who overtook the people who were racist and didn't want them in their bus, in their property. But today, now, with all the tensions, people and the police, they are so distant from each other, and police cannot respond to all the madness that is unfolding. So freedom fighters has armed themselves and now are acting like as patrolmen, as guardians of the local community, as they should. And the important part here is that, this is opening up the channels of thought. It's creating a new model of what it means to be involved in the community. It's not about slogans. It's not about, laying down and reenacting the murder of a man, but it's more about acting as human beings and taking responsibility for your community. And I think this is what the Freedom Riders are doing. But they mentioned one of the problems is that sustained involvement and activity in these actions is something that could be the main problem. And so if you're involved in these political groups and looking for something that is immediate solutions that are authentic and meaningful, I recommend you look at the example set forth by Freedom Fighters, a group organized by the North American African Americans Association of Colored People. I think that's their full name, NACCP, Freedom Riders in Minneapolis. Check out their example. But if you go beyond just what is happening in the United States, and you take an example from other activist actions, and going beyond the political to be human, then you'll see that there is a massive move towards an evolution of consciousness, but also followed with responsibility, wisdom, virtue, reason. And so it's not just a bunch of hoopla. There are some real models and some real sophisticated ones that are above the state reaction and the state violence, because that is the dialectic where they win. So where is this coming from? How about, how do I know I'm on the right target? How do I know that what I am doing is a solution? Well, one thing that helps me to understand what is the solution, I wonder, what is the government doing? What are they targeting? And, what is their agenda? What are they publicly announcing that they're going to target or they're going to say? All right, well, here's a story, and it follows up. They're not disconnected. So I remember I talked about the Freedom Riders, mutual aid. I talked about currency. I talked about the economy, and I talked about our personal responsibility and how this conflict, these crises, they are not necessarily just today. They've been exacerbated through political action, the manipulation of currencies, and all these different things. And we all could have freedom if we choose to believe in it. And we can all have different types of communities, but if we choose to be responsible and persist in what we do. And then remember, I talked about currency and community, the two objectives that I like, currency and community. And there's a reason for it. And there's a reason. And now I remember I asked, okay, how do we know if we're on target? How do we know if we're doing something right? Well, we notice what the government is doing. The government is targeting people who are holding cryptocurrency and are not filing for taxes. Taxes keep the whole system alive and running. That is the whole objective of the system of control, to keep the system running. And, taxes is are not voluntary. And if you want to pay taxes, and if they're voluntary, maybe you should support those things. But if there's a government centralized authority, remember top-down hierarchy, where they are in control, they make policies, and the police enforcers, they push and push people down and down. Meanwhile, the economic consequences keep us in poverty. So if we're looking for a solution, if we're looking to create a community, we need to adopt a new currency, a new exchange, a new way of thinking, a new model of organizing. Now here, the IRS with the DEA have talked about analyzing data from users in Coinbase so that they can track them and trace them and find out if they're up to something. So that is why the currency is important, because the dollar, the exorbitant privilege, which was created through unethical action, the currency manipulation, expansion of military bases, and the control of the world through, all these these two different dynamics, then now all the consequences that we externalized, all the risk that we externalized, and we kept all the reward, all the goods, all the prosperity are coming back to us. So we need to redeem ourselves by taking action, being responsible, and having wisdom. I harp on this point because it's so important today more than ever. So the U.S. crypto exchange, Coinbase, wants to sell its blockchain analytics software to 2 federal agencies, public record shows. In brief, Coinbase aims to sell blockchain analytic services to the DEA and the IRS, according to public comments. The San Francisco firm stands to make as much as $250,000 from the deal for the DEA for its identity attribution software. Coinbase has faced criticism in the past for its association with controversial surveillance tech company Hacking Team. So that's the brief, and this is the issue. And so this follows up from an older story where IRS agents proposed draconian tactics to investigate Bitcoin users, and you'll see why. Anyways, IRS proposes extreme tactics, and in a slideshow, it talks about different cryptocurrencies, what they are and what some of them are used for. This is the source, and it talks about, Bitcoin, Ripple, Ethereum, Litecoin, all these different altcoins and cryptocurrencies that have different utilities and different projects and ideas. So Bitcoin is not the only one, in other words. Okay, so I implore you to read this article because it will show you what is the tactics of control, but it also clues you in that the government is actively in the background pursuing people who choose to opt out of the currency. People who choose to opt out of the currency are targeted by the government because they want to confiscate their wealth and prevent them from manifesting their own individual interests. So that's the reality of where we live. We don't live in a free market society. We live in a Draconian, Orwellian, Huck's a Brave New World model of living. It's terrible, but it's like just the news. It's just the way it is. But trust me, there are positive solutions, and you need to be responsible and embrace them. So I'm going to follow this article later on and create more information on cryptocurrency, how to get into it, what to avoid, the risk, and all the other stuff. Many people talked about it, but some of the problems where people talk about crypto, they kind of exclude the main picture. They exclude the whole framework of what is happening, and they only see it as this or that. And I think that we can connect it to the larger picture. I think there's all these people doing massive great work. I'm just saying that I think it's necessary to put it all together and show it how it actually gives you a solution. And in warning, the IRS is now targeting thousands of Americans who didn't report this trendy investment. Here's what to do if you're one of them, right? And that's just an alternative article to check to keep things balanced. All right, now, like I talked about solutions and I talked about community and taking responsibility, something big is catching on during these Black Lives Matter demonstration. Something peaceful, beautiful, and as creative as this movement, and that is how Bitcoin can help the African American community. And if you haven't heard of Isaiah Jackson wrote a book, Bitcoin and Black America. Isaiah Jackson has asked people to protest by buying Bitcoin. And that's the beauty of it. It's not a simplistic, naive, cringe thing to say that Bitcoin offers a solution. It's a currency that is not manipulated by the government, that it cannot be confiscated by the government. So if that if this is coming out like stuttering just out of excitement, I suppose, like no, but in reality, this Bitcoin is not just one thing. There are so many other tools like Bitcoin, and I'm so glad that the conversation is catching up to that. So let's just look at this. This is pretty cool, isn't it? So that's great, but let's find out what Isaiah Jackson has to say about all this and, Bitcoin. Where does it fit? Where does it fit? And he appeared on the Max Kaiser report, and he talked about his role and what the solutions are. Let's find out.
Look, tell us how you feel about all what's going on, Isaiah.
Honestly, it's overwhelming because it's organic. It's really the people doing it. I didn't, for the record, I didn't pay any protesters to go out with signs. So it literally is just people taking pictures and sending it to me. And the scope of where it's at, I've seen it in New Jersey, Raleigh, North Carolina, London. The fact that it's international now is very promising. So good to see. And I'm glad people are focusing on the economics that can come after the smoke clears.
And of course, you and I have a long history with Bitcoin. As a matter of fact, on page 12, it's mentioned.
Yeah. So the economic consequences that happens after the dust settles is very important because it's the beginning of change. It's the beginning of manifesting what we really want. What are we fighting for? We shouldn't focus entirely on what we're fighting against, but we should focus on what we're fighting for. And Isaiah Jackson makes a really clear point on that, because what we should be fighting for is to keep our community safe and prosperous, and we need to take direct action and be responsible for it. And I think this is a message that can reach everyone,
And also have Bitcoin as leverage for your community.
So this is his explanation of why he thinks Bitcoin is important to use. And he uses the word leverage meaning, a tool that we can use to our advantage.
The Black community, finally, in America, Isaiah.
I just want to say first, your statement, I understood exactly what you meant. But yes, also, I do want to point out that we can build our own communities. And the way Bitcoin can help is economically, we need leverage. And I believe that as an asset class, also as a payment system, if you can create a circular economy sometime in the future, and also have Bitcoin as leverage for your community, that's something that you can use in the future, much like any other assets that people buy. So if you buy real estate, same thing. Those things are leverage for you to be able to get policies in place, to have the money to support yourself and have strong communities where we can basically have the police that bother us out of there, because economically, it doesn't do anybody any good. And I think that's one of the only ways to defeat it, is economically being able to do that. And I think Bitcoin can help.
Exactly. I agree with this man entirely. And that's something that I am currently involved in, working with the Hispanic community. And that's where I'm coming from, with the Laredo Free Thinkers based in Laredo, Texas, a border city where I grew up. And I've had a lot of reports. I've had a lot of different community experiments, and I understand the situation there. But I think everyone, whether they're white, black, brown, Asian, we should all embrace this blockchain technology and Bitcoin in general, because from personal experience, it has allowed me to manifest myself even more than before. Imagine an incentive where your creativity and your input is valued and tokenized, and you are part of a community that allows you to manifest your uniqueness and bring other solutions and perspective to the whole idea. So right now, everyone might be talking about Bitcoin and how great it is. And you could look at the price and say, wow, it's expensive, it's bad. We'll cover these issues in my next podcast. And if you have any questions, please drop them so I can understand where you're coming from and approach this conversation from your perspective, or try to engage you as much as I can, because it's about the conversation again. So right now, while everyone is talking about Bitcoin, you buy into that system. But what if you could create into the system? Okay, so by create, I mean your talents, your skills, your imagination, your poetry, your writing, wherever you're coming from, your research. What if that can be monetized, tokenized, and in helping you and develop you and help others develop themselves as well? Then that's what they are. Then this is where we are now. Instead of Bitcoin, where you buy into the system, you create a system with the use of the blockchain. And one of the one of the best projects that I love and I promote and I onboard people as much as I can is called Hive, a decentralized blockchain where a social media free of censorship and allowing you to monetize your own content, not allowing you, letting you monetize your own content and take full responsibility for it is a wonderful solution. And people are going to hear more about this. So we need to keep the conversation alive. And I think we're going to drop it into this very end article. Bitcoin is a way to repair economic injustice. Author Isaiah Jackson. And I recommend the book. I'm going to get it. I'm going to read it, and I'm going to spread the word. Now, why I'm going to read it and spread the word is because I want to know what their perspective is. I'm currently working on something already as well that is analogous to this. Intuitively, I think all creative individuals, intelligent and beautiful, can recognize that this is something that will offer us tools for us to take responsibility and manifest our own destiny. That is the positive message I want to leave you with, because damn, there's just so many negative, pessimistic news. That's the whole purpose of it. That's the whole purpose of the media and the whole purpose of the state, to stimulate your fear response and create power from nightmares. They have no interest in creating a beautiful, optimistic world, because that doesn't make money. And if it did, it doesn't last very long. Anyway, so community, currency, control, censorship, all these other things, they have solutions, and it's based on your individual action. I love you. Love yourself. Have a wonderful day. Thank you for joining me today on the News Roundup podcast with your friend Hector Combo. I should probably get a new sign off. Until then, this is your friend.